when we hear the word environment, we think what's coming in, like what's coming at us. But you're saying it's basically everything we do. It's what we choose to eat, how we choose to move, how we choose to sleep, right? So it's almost anything that happens to the body.
If we have a great deal of stress, either in utero or a child or as an adult, or we're dealing with a car accident and we have inflammation, it can switch those genes then into an adverse position. Luckily, we have the ability to most of those be able to change through our environment.
My friends, this episode of the Healthy Parenting Handbook has some serious writer downers. My guest, Brenda Wollenberg, is an expert, well, sort of an expert. I mean, no one is a real expert yet, as we'll talk about, in epigenetics. This is such an emerging field. It's super exciting to me because of the direction of the pathways it can give us for healing, for feeling better, for achieving our best health. Brenda and I have a fantastic conversation. It's a little longer than our normal Healthy Parenting Handbook interviews, but I could not stop. I hope that you also cannot stop, or that if you have to, you hit pause, come away, go back the next day and finish it up. I actually met Brenda through the most interesting route of any interview guest I've ever had. I met her through a kitchen stewardship reader who's been in my community for over a decade. And a few years ago, I ended up being a stress mastery accountability partner with her from a whole world apart, many countries away. She connected me with Brenda, who is her practitioner. And then I found out that Brenda was also a reader from at least 9 or 10 years ago. It was just so amazing. I was super excited to interview Brenda, and it turned out better than I even expected. Brenda Wollenberg's area of focus is analyzing and interpreting genetic profiles to design personalized, holistic wellness programs. Whew, that's a mouthful, but let me tell you more about her. She's been featured on TV and podcasts. She's had articles and newspaper columns published in a wide range of print media, and she enjoys teaching. She is a fabulous teacher. You are going to love her. And in a variety of educational and corporate settings. Brenda is the author of 2 books, Overweight Kids in a Toothpick World, which is a practical manual for families dealing with childhood obesity, and Eat, Sleep, Move for Your Genetic Body Type, How to Physically and Emotionally Care for a Unique You. These books sound fascinating, you guys. Brenda loves to co-create with her clients a personalized for their body type and genetics, whole body path to wellness. And whole body for Brenda includes physical, top to bottom, emotional, and spiritual. Why? Because Brenda's got a crazy wealth of experience in so many fields. She's got decades of experience as a social worker, a co-leader of a faith community, and a nutritionist. Can you just feel the holistic value there? That is the trifecta: emotional, spiritual, and physical. This experience allows her to uniquely and compassionately help clients not only understand the science of their genetics, but also assist them in seeing patterns of behavior that may have contributed to unhelpful gene expression. Oh, gene expression. We'll talk about that too. Then Brenda helps clients shift that behavior, whether it's food, exercise, stress management, or supplements, to one that is more supportive of their overall personal health. Whew. That is a heck of a file for a heck of a gal, and I know you are going to love this interview. Well, Brenda, this is such a treat to chat with you today because when it comes to epigenetics, it's something I'm super excited about because it's an emerging field and I know just enough to be dangerous. So let's learn today. I'm happy you're here.
Oh, I'm really glad to be here. And just so you know, there's a lot of people that fall in the category of knowing just enough to be dangerous. It's a very new field, so there's hardly anybody that's expert, and I don't even count myself a major expert in it. So yeah, you're in good company.
The new part is so exciting because it seems like when you're in school, elementary school, high school, even college, it feels like you're learning static science often.
Yeah.
Things that were discovered hundreds of years ago. And so it is very exciting that obviously science is still changing. We're still learning with so much more. There's so little we know when it comes down to it about the human body. So what is your story? Are you a science geek? How did you get into all these different areas of interest?
Well, I know it's a lot, and I didn't even mention to you that I had a couple-year foray with a good friend of mine doing dry flower arrangements. Okay, so that didn't even make the bio. Okay, but I would say that I started with social work, like many people do, because of a desire to be supportive of others. Okay, my family took in lots of foster kids when I was growing up, and I have 4 adopted siblings, so it kind of was a natural part of that. But also as part of our growth journey, we're hoping we can get a little bit of healing and growing, on our own. So there was that kind of double kind of pronged approach to me wanting to be there. And I found in university when I started studying topics like psychology and biology, because I was trying to decide if I should be a PE teacher, so I got some sciences in there as well. But social work really seemed like a natural option for better understanding my own internal dynamics, and then also being able to be trained in ways that could be supportive of other people, particularly in processing childhood experiences. Okay. So that was kind of the social work aspect. I remember at one point, one of my English teachers speaking to me and saying, I really think you should go into writing. And I said, I really think I need to earn a living, so I'm going to go the social route. Now, I think Dr. Elsie Holmes would be really impressed that I did have written 2 books and have done things like that. So that's a shout out to her. Pastoring, I would say I came in through the back door. So my father was a pastor and was a pastor in an era when that role kind of sometimes fostered appearance and adherence to rules over necessarily truth and relationship and finding out, relationship with God or whatever. It was more regimented. And he did his best. He did a really good job. He served lots of people really well, but it took a toll on him and his family, me and our siblings, and my parents ended up getting divorced. So I actually made a vow that I would never marry a pastor. I could distinctly remember the day I thought, this is it. We're not doing this. Then, darn it, I fell in love with a guy, probably wanted to be a pastor since he was a toddler. And so I thought, oh, brother, but it worked. And then we ended up in a denomination that was kind of on the tail end of the Jesus movement. And so kind of hippie, kind of that kind of thing. And they really had a belief that women were equal, that they were valued, they had important roles to play in ministry. And so Mark and I actually ended up co-pastoring for 20 years. We job shared as it was, and it was a really positive experience. So I'm glad I could kind of break that vow and take it back and have some things. So then you have the education and experience with the emotional part of us, the spiritual part of us. I thought, what the heck? Let's just go for the gusto. And when our youngest went to kindergarten, I thought, okay, time to cover some of this physical aspect, because I'd been writing in this field, had a couple of newspaper columns and things, and I really needed some credentials to back it up. So that's when I went back to school to become a holistic nutritionist, so I could kind of have the trifecta, body, mind, spirit thing all together. So yeah, that's the weird and wild and wonderful way. It's not just because I was flighty and couldn't decide what to do when I grew up. There was, in hindsight, a method to my, weaving around. So yeah.
Absolutely. And we live in this world where people don't just choose one career. It's actually really uncommon. Yeah. So, and a phrase I use often with my interview guests is, oh, so you're addicted to learning.
Oh, completely.
And that's perfect, because that's exactly the people from whom I want to learn. So epigenetics, Brenda, this exciting field, we got to start at the base. What's the definition? What is epigenetics?
Sure. So it comes it's derived from a Greek word. Some people say Greek and Latin, epi, okay, meaning over or above. And in this case, it's over and above genetics, so our actual DNA material. So this area of research, and we joked about this being a new emerging field, and it's kind of cool. Not a lot of people know a lot about it, but I joke with my children. We have 5, and I'm like, oh, your mom is finally cutting edge, okay? Like, it's like all these years it took me to become this way, but it's happening. So this area then, epigenetics, epi over above genetics, involves the study of how our behaviors, our environment can cause actual changes in the way our DNA works or the way our genes express themselves. So it's factors that are kind of on top of our actual genetic makeup. So in a way, it's what we've been doing for years. So I was a very sick social worker. I met with a master herbalist way outside my comfort zone. I was not woo-woo at all at that time, okay? But what he did almost 4 decades ago in really asking me a ton of questions, in creating a very personalized dietary plan, a very personalized exercise plan, a supplement plan that was personalized. He was doing vitamin formulations in Canada at the time. And he also addressed spiritual components as well. Gave me a couple of books to read about, some mindfulness and understanding the spiritual side of our being. So he, in essence, actually helped me reset my genes 20 years before the human genome had ever been mapped. So now we just have a fancy, and as we said, cutting edge term for what many healthcare practitioners have been doing. And I think the big piece is now not only is it a new term, but we also have a better understanding of why those things we recommend actually have the positive impact that they do. So I think that's kind of a cool aspect of it right now.
I agree. The fact that we've basically been using epigenetics without understanding what it
Yeah.
was, but you're right that the understanding gives us a pathway into maybe harnessing that power more effectively.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so how does our environment then, and let's also maybe define environment. What does that net encompass? How does our environment impact, and I want to say our genes, but I think more proper to say our genetic expression?
Yes, yes, because people will say to me, "Oh, so are my genes?" Say, for example, I have genes that are variant. It's usually the less beneficial version of this gene coding. If I do all these things, is my gene going to change into the coding that's the normal, the more usually more beneficial? And I'm like, that's not how biology works. Like you don't change your genes, but you absolutely can change the expression. So you're right with that. So what environment is, and Dr. Oz, this statement is accredited to lots of people, but usually to him, and it's a fairly crass statement, but I think it's a good explanation. He and others have said that genetics loads the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. So we get this package of genes from birth, and I'll give you a little biology 101 refresher in a minute, okay? But what plays a huge role is the things outside of those genes. So what I put in my mouth, how I move my body, what time I get to bed at night, if I get sun on my face in the morning, how I handle stress. And then beyond just this environment here, what's going on in my external environment? So am I exposed to a lot of pesticides and toxins? Am I of different types? Am I in a very stressful job? Am I in a stressful relationship? Did I experience adverse childhood events when I was growing up? So those external things then also play a role in that. I'll give you a little biology 101 refresher in case any of your listeners are going like, oh man, this is like grade 12. I haven't been back to that for a while. So I'll give you a little quote from the National Institutes of Health. So DNA, long molecule made by stringing 4 chemical bases together. I like to say it's pretty cool that the gene alphabet is only 4 letters long, A, G, T, and C, okay? And so those bases pair with each other, A with T, C with G, to form units called base pairs. And it's the order that those units go in that defines genes and then gives information that cells need. Usually it's a protein coding of some sort, a coding to produce some kind of protein. But if you think back to that high school biology and you were wandering down your hallway at lunchtime, and outside the science room door, there were all these models with either Tinker toys or like marshmallows and toothpicks, all in these, little curled kind of helix. That's where it comes from. And so our environment then impacts the way that those genes express themselves. So like I said, you can't change what you got from your biological mom and your biological dad, which letter it was, A or T or whatever. But you have the opportunity to toggle them or switch them into either almost like a dormant position so they don't express themselves if they're a challenging gene, or I like to say to reawaken or rekindle a positive expression that has been maybe suppressed by stress or inflammation, that kind of thing. Does that make some sense?
I like that I asked you. I'm really glad I asked you to define environment just because it was more than I expected. I think when we hear the word environment, we think what's coming in, like what's coming at us. But you're saying it's basically everything we do. It's what we choose to eat, how we choose to move, how we choose to sleep, right? So it's almost anything that happens to the body.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's, and even now with a lot of with things coming out and our understanding of how trauma impacts the body, some really well done books in the last couple of years and lots of material on this, we're starting to understand that even the ability to self-regulate is a super helpful tool that then can impact the genes. So yes, everything, inflammation, stress, it's almost like it can just come in. I like to think about the genes that we got when we were, born, when we were conceived, almost like an electrical panel. And so if you think about in your basement or garage, wherever you have it, all the switches are one way or the other, and that's our, original DNA coding. Some of those switches are in an adverse position, like less helpful to us. Maybe we don't handle stress as well. Maybe we have more food-seeking behavior, which worked really great 5,000 years ago. Not so helpful when you can open your pantry and have a mini Costco in there any time of the day or night. So they're in a certain position, and every time, for example, if you get a power surge at your house, that can come through and wham, just flip those all different ways. Likewise, if we have a great deal of stress, either in utero or a child or as an adult, or we're dealing with a car accident and we have inflammation, it can switch those genes then into an adverse position. Luckily, we have the ability to most of those be able to change through our environment.
When it comes to epigenetics, so I'm just trying to continue to wrap my brain around it, because in some ways we could really simplify it and say, yeah, what we do matters to our health. Okay. But when it's at a genetic level, I want to talk a little bit about generationally how this impacts like our passing down of our genes.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I've heard of epigenetics, people say like, oh, well, blah, 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 epigenetics, they throw out this word, but we don't know so much. And so it's often in one of two categories. It's like, oh, well, if your grandparents smoked, then they might have impacted the genes they passed to you, right? That's the negative bucket. Or the positive examples, the powerful ones, like, okay, sure, your genes might be coded for something like Crohn's disease, which we think is my husband's story, but that's not your destiny. Epigenetics allows you to toggle those genes on and off, which he did. What do you see as kind of the positives and the negatives? And maybe we'll talk a little bit generationally.
Sure. So I think the positives that happen as we grow in our understanding of epigenetics and, like you said, these things being passed down, I think the number one thing I see with my clients is hope. So, we have a family history. I'm just making this a scenario up, but we have a family history of type 2 diabetes. I'm pretty sure I'm going to get it. Or my family, everyone has obesity, or if no one's athletic or whatever. Okay. And I think once people understand epigenetics, there is this little seed of hope that gets planted in there. And I won't go into great length teaching on it here, but some of the training that I've taken talks a lot about the difference between, say, a trigger gene and an N gene. So someone could have like an N gene, Crohn's, women with the BRCA in the variant gene, so potentially having breast cancer as a possibility, that kind of thing. Those would be more things that would be the end stage gene. And I think what's really encouraging for people is to understand there's all these wax is not a very scientific term, volume of trigger genes that we have control over that will impact whether that end stage gene even happens. I mean, you can have the worst case scenario of the BRCA genes and never develop breast cancer because you've taken care of trigger genes. And likewise, women that do not have the variant of the BRCA genes will end up with breast cancer because of other combinations of things. So I think hope is the biggest one. I think the other really positive thing I see out of a greater understanding of epigenetics is that there is a growing measure of self-control and discipline. Like a lot of times it's like, oh, I read about this in a book, or my neighbor tried this wellness approach, or my buddy's running a half marathon, or whatever. I should do this, and, we can't control everything. But once you start understanding that there are some things that actually might be in your control, that you do have the ability to have an impact, I find my clients are much more believing in their ability to produce more wellness. And that self-control then falls out of that because, of course, motivation is high. It's instead of my nutritionist saying, you should follow this food plan, it's my genes saying, you should follow this food plan. And I think there's a huge difference in motivation with that. So those are positives. Some negative things I see with this growing field is that, like many wellness fields, the possibility for fraud, snake oils, pipe dreams is massive because, people will get their raw data from a company like 23andMe or DNA Allure or Ancestry, for example, and they'll upload it somewhere, pay to have a report. And the reports will be very generic. They won't cover enough genes. They won't look at the interplay of genes. And so I feel like a negative side of this is that some of us are kind of getting taken to the cleaners in an area because we're not looking at a broad enough perspective. Or, for example, someone will get on a bandwagon, oh, if you've got this gene, or these genes, you should be doing these supplements, and this is what you should do. And there's not an understanding, a deep enough understanding, like, for example, a really, really good green supplement that many people will do super well on, good ingredients in it, etc. But it has a bunch of raw cruciferous vegetables in it, broccoli sprouts, Brussels sprouts, that kind of thing, without understanding that for many people who have very fast, say, stage 1 detox genes to do with the liver, the way the liver processes free radicals, etc., and toxins are coming in, you're adding fuel to the fire. You're making that stage 1 go even faster. And so their stage 2 that is overwhelmed even more. Or someone will go on a juice kick diet and juice tons of cruciferous vegetables, not understand why they feel so lousy, and not just like a little bit of detox, like really lousy. And so I think some of the negative things that are happening are due to not get rich quick. I think people care, but I think they don't know enough when they're putting it out that way. And then the last thing I would say that's negative is around the security and privacy issues. So that's definitely that is a legitimate concern, especially with parents, because they're maybe wanting to talk to me about getting a child DNA done. And I'm hesitant with that because a child can't really give fully formed consent because they don't know all the ramifications. So there is security issues, and sometimes raw data is sold to things like pharmaceutical companies. And if that's not what you want, then you want to be aware that there is that aspect to the field as well. And then because I hate ending on negatives, what you can do around those is do your homework. Get testimonials, ask questions about the company or the supplement or the data collection agency. We have choices, and there are some newer companies that don't sell data, destroy it right away. There's more security that's coming in place if you are really know what you're looking for and asking the right kinds of questions.
That all makes a lot of sense. And just to summarize, it sounds like you're saying that as with any knowledge, really, but especially new knowledge, that as you mentioned, not a lot of people are experts at all. We have some incomplete knowledge. People are extrapolating generalized or generic advice, which maybe not always will apply to an individual, unique human, even if some genes match up because the genetic profile is so complex.
Yes. Okay. You summed that up very, very well. And only by really looking at a broader spectrum can you start seeing pieces of the puzzle that you wouldn't see with just kind of a tunnel vision approach.
And the hope is so important. I'm so glad you started there because I can just see, you can hear other people's voices. At least I can. Maybe other people can't. I can hear other people's voices in my head, confesses Katie publicly. Anyway.
Join the club. Yeah.
I can hear memory. I can hear people saying in my past, like, oh, well, my family has a history of heart disease, so I'm really worried, right? Or because we can take on those genetics almost like they're an identity or a destiny. And so there is a lot of hope. There's a ton of empowerment in saying, who cares what my genes may have been passed to me, say? I have a lot of power to turn them on and off. That's incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
And I want to talk too, it feels like we're talking about a lot of sort of disease genes. What about some of these environmental factors that you mentioned where your social work experience really comes in, these adverse childhood experiences? trauma, big T trauma, little T trauma,
Yeah.
and stress. And by the way, viewers, I would direct you to episode 12. We talk a lot about trauma in that one.
Okay.
If this is a rabbit hole, you want to jump further down. But how do those things that they don't feel genetic,
I know.
right?
I
They
know.
don't feel like pesticides and or
Yeah.
gluten or something.
Yeah.
How do those affect gene expression?
Well, it's like if you ever wondered about the crazily interactive and connected and miraculous way that we have been made, then exploring this is another way to have that realization occur. Because adverse childhood events, as you mentioned, trauma, stress, though what happens with those is that you release stress hormones. And I use that with my little, quotes there because these hormones do much more and they kind of got a bad rap, I think. Things like cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, like those are super important. Like those kept us alive. If a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you down, you are really glad you have a rush of cortisol and that your body is diverting energy from digesting your last meal and running it to your limbs so you can actually run away. So they're super important. The trouble is that things like cortisol, uh, like inflammation as well, can turn up to 90% of our genes to the adverse position, independent of how you are tending to those genes. So you can be eating well, you can be sleeping well, the stress can do that. So when we know that adverse childhood events, let's start there, okay, have an impact on us. And actually, when even in looking at the genetics, many of the genes that I'm learning about and doing research on, they will specifically say if there were adverse childhood events, this gene will be likely more impacted. And that is because as children, we don't understand our role in that stress. It seems like we must have done something wrong to have had a parent have a mental health breakdown or have a something, and so we really personalize and expand our role in that. And then what also happens is because it happened at an early age where we don't necessarily have a plethora of tools with how to handle that trauma, how to process it, if we come from a family that's somewhat, less functional than other families, we may not have even some of the self-regulation tools or the comfort. We might actually get the opposite of what we need from a parent. So we end up in a cycle where moving forward, a similar response. It can be as simple as somebody saying something to you negative, where your eye is kind of in the same direction that parent, said a negative thing, or it can be something that seems fairly similar, but this, let's say a husband does not have some of that baggage that our parent unfortunately did, but it triggers that response. So the earlier on that happened, the more easy it is to get stuck in stress cycles that have us having where we actually feel like we're back in that beginning position. Okay, so those will impact not only us, but potentially a child that we're carrying or a child that we are raising later on. And so, and how it works is, well, I've given you some direction, but the one other way that I wanted to mention is that with our HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenals, I'm going to give a really rudimentary, so apologies to any, PhD biologists here, but it's basically, the hypothalamus secretes a few little messages to go down to the pituitary gland that triggers a bunch of responses that then drop down little messages to cortisol to be produced in the adrenal glands. And that is the HPA axis is a negative feedback loop. Okay. And so it is supposed to be then once you have enough cortisol, tell these organs, you can stop producing it, we're good to go. We actually have a gene, FKBP5, that is instrumental in that negative feedback loop. If it is what I call a red code, like a traffic light, pay attention, homozygous for, variant, you've got the variant from both of your folks, that does not get the message. It's like your organs are wearing a headset like me, and they're just going, I'm not listening, I'm not listening. And so you can end up with just an ongoing cycle of cortisol. Very difficult to move into parasympathetic, very difficult to get rest and recuperation. I have that in red. Okay, thank you very much. And I used to joke that I would sneeze, do all the mindfulness, do all the centered prayer, walk in nature, sneeze. I'd be back in sympathetic mode again, going, what the heck? And now that I know this gene and I know what I need to do about it, I'm like the most Zen-like calm I've been my entire existence. So things like that are really important for understanding how they can keep you stuck in some of that trauma despite the therapy, despite the EMDR, despite the, whatever you're doing. So it's a helpful tool to know that because it will give you more life-changing ability to stay calm when you need to be calm. So that was a long explanation, sorry, but that's kind of how that all goes together in a nutshell.
Did you know my oldest son, Paul, and 4 of his friends wrote a cookbook for kids a couple years ago? It is the first and so far the only real food cookbook written by kids for kids, and I have to give Chef Junior a huge shout out as today's podcast sponsor. This book is packed with 100 recipes that kids can make, and they're leveled from beginner to advanced, so your littlest kids and your teens can find so many delicious foods to love. Again, this is written by 5 kids. They put together this cookbook when they themselves were between the ages of 9 and 12, and it launched in 2020 when they were between the ages of 12 and 15. It is so inspiring for other kids to see what children do in the kitchen and what they have put together, and to read words written by actual peers of their own. You can learn more about the book Chef Junior and how our kids put it together, and also get some special bonus gifts just from our kid authors. Go to kidscookrealfood.com/chefjr. That's kidscookrealfood.com/chefjr for all the fun bonuses, background scoop, and ordering information. Well, Brenda, I think that was one of the best explanations of adverse childhood experiences and why they get stuck, why they get stuck in the body that I've ever heard. So thank you for that. And then I think what you're saying about this gene, not that necessarily that gene is affected by trauma, but that it makes trauma more impactful for people who have that gene. It's harder for them to get rid of or get out of stress state in general.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And that gene then can also impact your children, depending how they're carrying it. Okay. And what we also know, and this is, again, so new, and again, I'm not like a major expert in this, but the studies and the research seems to show that the trauma that is experienced in our DNA, in our cells, and so it can be passed on to future generations, almost like a chemical note or a chemical mark. So even if you had, say, green, positive, homozygous for normal of an FKBP5 gene, for example, you could have experienced trauma in utero or growing up, not even your parents could have, and that could be passed down to you. Now, the nice thing, again, this is where the hope and motivation comes in, is that you also have the ability to change that. Epigenetics says you get to change even that mark or chemical note as well by what you do. So yeah.
And it is all so fascinating. I know I've seen, little hints of, I've never read the research studies, but I've seen reports of studies on, women during the Irish potato famine and the children who were in utero in that time. But then you go it's kind of like blowing it out bigger, that people who survived concentration camps, their children have the higher stress hormones. And it's not that it was physical, and I'm using big air quotes there. It's not that they were in utero. It's that the gene expression actually changed and was passed down. And I think there's even a study on women who were expecting or who had babies after the World Trade Center, who lived in New York City during the World Trade Center attacks. And I just want to read all these research studies. It's so fascinating. So yes, hope that we can change, but also it's kind of a weight of responsibility. Like, let's get ourselves straight here, because we are impacting future generations. I think of that Old Testament, where they say like your sins will impact 1,000 generations. And I'm like, see, we're proving faith.
I know. And the really nice thing is that all the stuff you did right also impacts future generations too. So I joke with my children, they're adults now, 27 to almost 40 this year. And I just say to them, my goal is to pass on less trauma to you than happened to me. And I know for my parents, they had probably a subconscious go through the same thing. That's just, we want to give our children less things they have to deal with and more tools to be able to deal with the things that they do, you know.
And let's jump into those tools because I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to talk about the positive, right? We know that we have the knowledge that we have the power, but we don't have any of the tools yet. So, what do you do, Brenda, to help clients shift patterns of behavior to one that's more supportive of their genetic expression and their overall health?
So, long before I knew about epigenetics, at least in the official way now, the last 5 years, I worked in my practice with an acronym called BALANCE, BALANCE, and it stood for body type, attitude, laughter and play, activity or exercise. The N was a good night's sleep. The C was clean water, and the E was eating for health. Nothing has changed in the way that I help people, shift their behavior, meaning we have to cover all of those things. So body type has just got a lot more specific with genetics. So instead of just doing a survey to know if you need a little more carbohydrates, a little more protein, if you're a little more lean towards sympathetic or parasympathetic, we now have a much more clear blueprint of that, okay? But what we do with that is really give them, like I like to say that when you are looking at moving forward, when you're looking at shifting things, the first thing you need is energy. So I almost always start with dietary approach. So what do your genes say about, the ideal amount of protein for you? Are you someone who can handle a lot of carbohydrates? Are you someone who is less good with carbohydrates, a little more prone to, say, type 2 diabetes or whatever? So let's see if we can keep your carbohydrates in a more manageable level. One of the things that was super surprising to me was the genes that have to do with saturated fat intake. And I mean, I've been a fan of saturated fat for a long time, that I feel like it just got so vilified. Okay, I mean, good grief, you need saturated fat to make hormones. Like we need this. But I was surprised at the range that genetics dictates that you need, anywhere from, like, say 22 grams saturated fat a day to 40 to 50 grams. Like, that's a big difference, And so, I can really help you nail down what you should be eating. Of course, it's all set on the real food as close as possible to its original form, not becoming a food fanatic, all those bases. But we can actually help you in a way that will shift, because once you have energy, then you are better able, you got a little clarity on where we're going with this. Then when I give you a little more structure, like, ideally, this is the type of exercise that you do better on. I know you think you love HIIT, but it is killing your muscles and causing inflammation. Can we get you to move to something that's a little more endurance-based, a little more biking, walking, running, swimming, lengths? Or if you're really set on HIIT, like I am, I love high-intensity interval training and Tabata. How about if we modify how hard you go for your intense and how long you give yourself for your rest phases? So that literally is the way we start breaking it down. Give you some energy first, so you've got some ability, give you some structure so you know where you're headed, and then really accountability and feedback to, as you try these things, what do you find is working? Because ultimately, yes, I'm looking at your genes. Yes, I'm giving you this, but this is about a partnership. And how do you feel? Is this causing a positive response? Is it not quite yet? Then what do you feel is working better? Dialogue back and forth like that, But yeah, it's really about four main areas. What are you eating? How are you moving? How are you calming? All right. And then how are you supplementing? So those will be the ways that we help people shift.
I'm absolutely fascinated by this. And again, I'm hearing the voices in my head saying things like, I've tried everything, or, oh, there's so much conflicting information out there. How do you figure it out? And I think people kind of get to a loss. We're really frustrated and we're confused. Who do I listen to? And do your clients love that you have this data?
Oh, it is totally. You don't even have to be a data junkie like me to just be so excited that the next time someone says to you, oh, you should try keto, they can go, no, I shouldn't, or yes, I should. And they actually, it just cuts through the wellness confusion today. Like you said, I feel like it's like a jungle out there, and most people are trying to hack through it with like a plastic disposable spoon, and and then they just get, okay, someone did this, I should do this. Oh, someone said I should do this, and it's very frustrating. Now they have a game plan for literally the rest of their life. They know the ideal fuel mix that's for them. They know how much. Sometimes I'm a big fan of sometimes foods and, chocolate and celebration things. How much can I get away with that doesn't flare up my arthritis or whatever, or give me a gut ache? And so they have some really clear ideas, and they know that if their sleep is disturbed for a couple of nights, for example, they can go back and think, okay, what did I shift? I teach this OCC formula to my clients, and it's O is for observation, C is for curious, and the next C is for compassion. So, oh, this is interesting. I haven't slept well for the last 2 nights. I want to get curious about that. What's shifted? What's changed? Oh yeah, we had that party, and look at that. And oh man, I haven't got outside and got the sun on my face in the morning for a couple of days. It's been really, I live in Vancouver. It's been, overcast for like a month now. So then they can go and be compassionate towards themselves. Oh, so I understand why this is happening. I'm going to tweak this. I'm going to be kind. Or even if they fall into a pattern of behavior that was an old pattern of behavior before they learned these things, and maybe they're having a binge eating episode, or they're having a too much exercise episode, or they're falling into kind of diet calorie counting mentality, which I move people away from, then they can still be compassionate and remind themselves, oh, this doesn't serve me well anymore. Remember, this is all I knew before. Now I have a bigger toolkit. There's other things I can do instead. So always with kindness, always with compassion as they are making these changes.
I am a data junkie, and I would be so excited to have this list because I do feel like I'm naturally curious. And so, yes, my husband just last night, his Aura Ring said his sleep score was great, but his readiness score was poor and his resting heart rate was high. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And we were doing that exact same thing. Oh, well, we ate dinner really late because kids' activities, and he and I ate dinner at 9:30 or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I said, I wonder what if that was it. And I feel like what the gene data would do would be a faster way to answer. Like rather than flipping through
Oh,
a
yeah.
500-page book, you're flipping through a 25-page book, kind of.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly it. Like in my practice, it's not like I do a ton of different things that I've done for 20 years, because holistic nutritionists, we don't diagnose or treat. So we're trained in something called symptomatology. It's like, what are we observing? What is the likely systems in the body that are either functioning well or not functioning well that would be contributing to those symptoms? So now, instead of doing an educated trial and error, which is all really what most healthcare practitioners do, because everyone is unique. So you go with your best guess as to what's going on. Now it's just like, ooh, okay, I can look at a data sheet. And I have a business partner, and this is a PhD biologist. It's always nice to have a PhD biologist with a genetics background as your business partner. But she's designed a one-page sheet. We'll just look at it. We call it our all-in wellness roadmap. And we'll just look at it and we'll go, oh, that's what's going on. They're not detoxing well. Oh, or it's inflammation. That's the one thing that we need to tackle first with them. So then all these other, because all this like dominoes. Like you can have good genes and have very challenging, say, a stress event. And bam, 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 bam. Just like the electrical panel switch, all these dominoes go down. But the nice thing is you can see kind of a core foundational issue, detox, inflammation, metabolism, and you can start getting that balance. And all these other dominoes start coming back up. And people are like, oh my goodness, like my head is clearer. And oh my goodness, I have more energy in the afternoon. All that slump. Oh, my moods are much more balanced. I'm able to respond things better, And again, like I'm not a big weight loss fan. Okay, I like, let's fuel you well. Let's get you exercising the way you should. Let's get you handling your stress. And your body's going to settle into a comfortable size that is right for you, whether that's rounder or taller or shorter or leaner, whatever. Having said that, if you get all these in place, then you more easily reach that comfortable for you size too.
I bet that's true. And Brenda, I do want to spend a little time talking about families and kids in particular, but I'm thinking about our listeners who might have just finished doing their dishes or finished folding their laundry, and they aren't going to hear the end. And I don't want them to be running like, oh, genes, cool, 23andMe. So could you tell us if someone wants to work with you or someone like you, what are the like good genetic testing to look for? How do we find
Sure,
them?
absolutely. So many people have already got 23andMe, and they often originally did it to reconnect with long lost relatives. Okay. And there are other people who are going, no, I did it for health. I do not want to connect with any more long lost relatives. Okay. But so if you already have your 23andMe data done, okay, then I just explain to people how to download their raw data from there. They send it to me. I used one of two different software programs that I'm trained in using, and then we either do one of the two different types of ways they can work with me. Okay, if they don't already have data done, and also one of the programs I use, I can use it from Ancestry as well. Okay, they can also get the raw data from that. If people are hesitant, and I completely understand it around the privacy and security, there's a company now out of Canada, but they will ship anywhere in the world that FedEx goes. They're called DNA Allure, Allure, and they have a genetic package on there that's basically the same pricing as 23andMe's non-sale pricing. And they are a brilliant lab that does your testing through a swab instead of a spit test, which is often easier for if children are doing it. Okay. And then they don't keep your data and they don't sell it to anybody. So that is often what I recommend for people who are a little leery, don't already have theirs done, and they would like to do it. And also, if they're considering it for children, really that's only the lab I'll recommend because I feel uncomfortable having a child's data in one of these other big companies that I don't really know what they're doing with it. And like I said, your child can't really give an informed consent yet. So it's better to use like DNA Allure, where you don't have to worry about your kid being concerned when they're 16 because their data is out there, that kind of thing.
That's great. So it sounds like it's not looking for the right test. It's looking for the right person to evaluate the tests.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yes.
numbers to crunch. A lot of four letters, but many permutations
Yes,
to crunch there.
exactly. Like once you get your raw data, like I said, you can send it lots of places and you get really cool booklets that come out, but they don't always give a broad enough picture. So, and then there are other people like me as well, but I am pretty good at giving you those layers and that broader picture. And also, I'm really into relevant genes that you can have practical application with. Like there's lots of genes that there's not something you can necessarily do about them, but let's work on the ones that we can do something about in a meaningful, like a life enhancing way. So yeah.
That's wonderful. And I know you do work virtually with people.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell people how to find your checklist? But then I want to have some falling action about kids and families in particular.
Sure. So I'm at www.imbalancedlm.com. The LM is for lifestyle management, so imbalancedlm.com. And if you go in there with the /self-check, there's a little evaluation tool, just a free tool that you can use that asks you some questions around your wellness. And you can decide if epigenetic work might be a helpful tool for you. Now, I designed it, so the answer is probably going to be yes, okay? But it does give you some really good food for thought around whether or not that might be a good next stage for you, okay? And on there, also, if you go to the imbalancedlm/shop, you can see the different ways that you can do epigenetic work. And there's a couple of free infographics and tools like that people are welcome to access.
Love that. So when we think about families, of course, whether you have genes run, like can we use any of this data without having our kids' genes run? Let's start there.
Yeah, really good question. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Okay. I've only done epigenetic work for the last 5 years and I've been a nutritionist for almost 21. Okay. So when you think about families, number one would be observe your kids. Okay. And just look at them. Like when I look back on ours now, even before, I knew metabolic typing early on with our kids. So I knew which of my kids, again, like I said, that's a very simple survey. You can do that, not invasive, etc. But even just looking at your kids, you'll be able to tell which kids seem to fall asleep after a big pasta dinner. and which kids seem more energized. Which kids the carbohydrates seem to have them maybe increase weight, excess body fat unnecessarily, kind of a deal. Now, believe me, I'm all about round babies. I want round babies and toddlers and all that kind of thing. So don't get me wrong on there. But if you kind of notice an exponentially large increase in excess body fat when you do a lot of carbohydrates, you want to pay attention to that. Also look at, do some of your kids need more or less sleep? Okay. And you'll notice that sometimes you just got to get to bed earlier. They just need to be calmed down earlier in the evening, have a better sleep hygiene pattern, the bath, the story time, all that kind of thing. They don't do well if they have a soccer practice after supper. It's too energizing. So watch with that. And then just also notice, do you have children that have more or less trouble falling into rest and recuperate? And it's interesting. I mentioned that FKBP5, the one that doesn't hear the, turn off the cortisol that I have read. My husband has that one where he's yellow. So he got the variant from one parent and he got the normal from the other. So if you know genetics, that means all of our kids have to have at least one red. Okay. And then depending on Mark, they either got the yellow or red. I can look at our 5 kids, only 2 of who have had their genetics done, and I can tell you which ones got me double red and which ones can calm easier. Like, it's hilarious. You just start seeing and so those kids you're going to need to spend more time with, talking about emotions, talking about how all emotions are good, talking about what are some ways that we can decide how we're going to respond to emotions that serve us better, that get us more what we want and we hope out of this situation. So you'll see that there's just differences, and we all know our kids have differences, but you'll start being more intentional at looking at what you can do with it. And then, for example, around the food, the things like we had 5 kids. There's no way I was making every kid different meals, packing different lunches, or we're homeschoolers having different lunches at home, that kind of thing. So what we did a lot of once they learned about body typing was we had kind of make your own meals where taco salad, burritos, wraps, stir fries where there was rice was on the side and you could either have a lot of rice or little rice. You would put beans or lots of meat with your tacos. So we really helped the kids to kind of figure out what they needed and then dialogue with them. How did you feel after? Did that feel good? Did you have energy? Were you, how were your moods? The 4 things I always have kids check adults too. What's your energy? How was your mental clarity? Were you pretty sharp after that lunch? Did you do good in school in the afternoon? How were your moods? Barring an unfortunate incident at the playground, were you still positive? And then were you bloated? How did your tummy feel? So those are 4 really good clues to help their kids get the right full mix. So you can absolutely do this without having genetics, just by acknowledging there's going to be genetic differences and how can you adapt for that. Just learn. Like you said, be a lifelong learner, read up on some things and begin to apply things that, see what happens when you try this. This worked well. Tick mark, that works great for that kid. This kid does better at cross country. This kid does better sprints. Let's get them into sports that they will have more of a chance of excelling at because their bodies are not so sore after when they do this or that. So yeah, just observing. I don't want to add another layer on parenting. Good grief, you already got enough going on. Take it easy. This is a new field. You don't have to be perfect at it, but at least be acknowledging and shifting and be willing to change some things if it looks like it's not working for a kid.
Brenda, those 4 questions that you can ask kids after eating, those are becoming a meme for sure on Instagram because it's so practical. And, I teach picky eating, parents with picky eaters, and I always say, gosh, our generation was not taught to listen to our bodies. We were not taught that food impacts the way we feel. And if our kids can have one skill from what I teach them, if they can listen to how food makes them feel, they are leaps and bounds away from our generation and the rest of their generation. So I love those 4 questions.
Yeah.
And you're right. It does. I know some moms out there are thinking, this is so hard. It's hard to think individually, especially the more kids you have. You had 5, so you're speaking from experience that it's possible. But also it is something we do, right? As much as we think that our lives are so busy that we're not maybe paying attention to individuals, we do know our children. It's a wonderful reminder to say, what do they need? because of who they are and how they were created. And I think this just infuses science into good parenting anyway, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically. So I love it.
Exactly.
I love the knowledge, love knowing all of it. It's so exciting, and it's encouraging to know too that we can serve all our kids in the same household
Yeah.
with the right structures.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
yeah, I love to leave parents with a message of hope. We've talked about that word a couple
Yeah.
times in our interview. So if you can
Yeah.
encourage parents in this, closing minute here in one way,
Yeah.
what do you want parents to remember?
I was going to say, be a lifelong learner. Like, if you can hold your hands open, if you can recognize that you don't have everything sold, if you can be open to shifting some of your paradigms and biases, then you are going to go far. You are going to make mistakes, okay, but you can learn and pivot. I took my family down a year and a half long vegetarian side angle with a German husband, 6'2", ex-football player, thighs the size of my waist. I don't know what I was thinking. Okay. So we did the metabolic survey. I said, babe, I love you. We have to go buy you a cow this afternoon. He was like, hallelujah. Okay. So you can make mistakes. You can come back from them. Your family can still rise up and call you blessed. Okay. So learn, love, love along the way. And you got this. Okay.
Best closing story ever. And it goes with excellent advice. Thank you so much, Brenda. Everyone,
You're
check the
welcome.
show notes for the direct link to Brenda's information.
Thank you. I enjoyed being with you so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. I hope your brain feels fed and your heart feels full, and that you feel connected, knowing that there are other parents on this journey with you. We're just trying to raise healthy, independent adults. And the next time you think, man, there is no handbook for this job. Now there is the Healthy Parenting Handbook. Look up the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please leave a review, my friends, as that helps other parents who need this information to find us. And of course, subscribe. That's a huge help. You can also look for our shorts as a reel on Instagram at Katie Kimball Kids Cook, or subscribe to the Healthy Parenting Handbook Shorts channel on YouTube. You'll get those bite-sized portions of healthy parenting advice.